Good evening. First question, do you need the mic? Can you hear me without it? Okay, fine, all right. Again, I'll forget later, whoever is going to be speaking does not need to jump onto the stage from here. There's a door there and there are stairs leading up to the stage from behind. There's also a little very ugly stender for those who need it. Okay. My name is Chaim Bachler. I live in Beersheba in Israel, and I also am one of the directors of Mayaneh Yeshua Medical Center in Israel, in Bnei Brak. My job is actually fundraising, but don't worry, there's no appeal tonight. But you can always ask to see me later on. My thanks go at the beginning already to our partner in crime, Noah and Naomi Ferreira from Noah, and of course the British friends of Mayaneh Yeshua here in London. That's Dr. Boz Landau, Sarah Cohen, Stephen Goldberg, etc., etc. And of course, thank you to our speakers, who you will be introduced to in a moment or so. From Israel, that's Professor Rael Strauss, who is the head of the psychiatric building in Mayaneh Yeshua's Mental Health Center, and Dr. Bella Shanza, who will be heading the new English-speaking clinic for the gap year students, which you'll hear about a little later on. Before I introduce our first speaker, it is very appropriate that this week's Parsha, Parshat Bahar, mentions at the beginning of the Parsha twice the Issur, the prohibition of Lo Tonu and Al Tonu. And the word Lo Tonu is very, very translation, but it basically means to deceive somebody, to deceive somebody. And it mentions it twice, the Gemara says. The first time it talks about monetary deceit. You sell somebody something with a worth that is nowhere near the correct worth, or there's other types of monetary deceit, and there's being deceitful with words. There's no transaction, but you're saying something which can be hurtful and harmful. And when the Gemara discusses these two types of lehonot lemishu, they say that money you can give back. You can fix a monetary deceit. You cannot fix an insult. You cannot fix shaming somebody. You cannot fix being deceitful and mean to somebody by saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. And we know that from the work we are in Mayaneh Yeshua and where we go around the world, raising the awareness that this is an issue that previously has not been sufficiently addressed. And Baruch Hashem, I will just quote one person who said the reason why there is so much people addressing it, there's so many lectures and magazine articles about mental health, and it never used to be, is because there is no room left under the carpet. Just one statement. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our speaker, Professor Rael Strauss, the head of psychiatry at Mayaneh Yeshua, and you have to come, you can jump up. You're going to stand there, fine, so I'm going to give you a goodbye.
It's really a great pleasure to be here, to talk about a subject that is foremost on everyone's minds now in Israel, those who are not right there in the front, because it's something that's affecting everybody. And it's something that I think we're all very aware of, and I'd like to share with you some of what's going on. So we know that October the 7th was a major trauma for the whole country. And we know everyone said it's the day that the most Jews have been killed since the Holocaust, and it's an incredible trauma for the country, and the pictures and the movie, and everyone was caught by surprise. So with all our soldiers and the people who were injured and kidnapped, and so the first thing that people talk about is the injuries, the physical injuries. But the mental, the cost at the level of the mental health is phenomenal. And there hasn't been a war where these issues have been so prominent and foremost on people's concerns, not just for now, but for what's coming. And I want to share some of those issues with you. So what happened is haunting Israel day to day, and it's not getting better, because even today, I mean, it was released of those 5 young observers of the Tatzpan Europe, those young ladies who were kidnapped. It's constant trauma. We know that PTSD and trauma is worsened when there's re-traumatization. And it's this constant bombardment of pictures and being stuck in the quagmire. They're just plaguing everyone. And the fact that we don't have support around the world anymore, only the support of the Jewish community, which is incredibly helpful to the Jews of Israel and to the Israelis. The fact that it's just getting worse from all over the world, and you know what's going on in the United Nations, and now these 3 wonderful countries have decided to recognize the Palestinian state. This is very, very difficult for people because we feel like we're alone. So the scope of the tragedy has caused an incredible outpouring of distress at the mental health level. So the country as a whole is suffering. So this, and I wrote about this many years ago, about the ripple effect of terror. So what happens when there's a terror experience, the ripple effects, it's not just the person who's affected by the terror attack, but there's the people around him, there's a family, and then there's a community, and then there's a greater Jewish community, and there's a greater Jewish community around the world. And this is with regard to all kinds of terror situations. It happened in 9/11, it happened in the terror in France. It's always like this, a ripple effect of terror. So the ripple effect of terror is major in Israel, what's going on right now. And we know that terror in the past used to be something that just the person involved in. And now it was extended to the family members, and not just to the family members, who weren't even there, or people who knew someone who was there, or rescue workers or healthcare workers. But how it works is that the first stage in any kind of trauma is what we call acute stress disorder, and that starts between 3 days to a month. So what happens in the first day, and that's normal, like 60 to 80% people go through it. If you go through some kind of trauma, everyone's going to feel stressed. That's part of what it means to be human. It's a normal response to stress. And that doesn't necessarily mean you need to jump and you need help. Sometimes if it affects function, it needs to be dealt with. And what happens then is anxiety, fear, depression, repeated experiences, flashback nightmares, attempts to avoid thinking about that. What happens in the first month? And that's normal stuff. If we don't do that, we don't go through that, we're not human. You have to be human. I come from Africa, and I spoke about this one. If you're in the middle of the jungle and the lion's running after you, if you don't feel anxious and run away, that's not good. If you stand still and you don't move, you feel no fear, you're going to get eaten up, not good. If you feel too much anxiety, you stress, and you freeze, and you get eaten up, also not so good. But if you go into the market, to the store to buy some chocolate, and you feel as if a lion's running off, it's also not good because it's inappropriate. So sometimes anxiety and stress is a normal response to things you have to respond. And that's what's happening with acute stress disorder. So all of that affects people's routines in the first month. The question is, and they say that the incidence of acute stress in Israel after October 7 was much higher than any other wars that happened before, because it wasn't just the soldiers on the front, it was the whole population, it was civilians, it was people in their bedrooms and in their salons and their kitchens that were attacked. It was the front of the army were the civilians, so it was a very high rate of acute stress disorder. If it lasts longer, if it goes on more than a month, this normal kind of stress response, and it continues to affect function, then we call it PTSD, which everyone talks about, post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder has a very unique kind of cluster of symptoms. It's not like any kind of stress. There are 2 types of stress that people go through life. You go through the stress of a divorce and failing an exam or being fired from a job. That's all very, very stressful. But the cluster of symptoms is very, very different in PTSD when a person's life is in danger, or a person's family member's life is in danger, or someone was in danger. And that the cluster of symptoms is very different. And then you get the flashbacks and the avoidance and the hyperarousal, and that significantly affects a person's function. It can last from 1 month to years. We did a study once from the Cold War, and a significant percentage of people are still suffering from PTSD many, many years later. It was not dealt with. And it seems that only about 10% of those who go through acute stress disorder in the first month go on to PTSD. And if it's not managed properly, They become very, very dysfunctional long term. So about 60% of Israelis were affected by ASD according to the studies, and that's a major risk. So for 60%, it wasn't just 60% of the soldiers, it was 60% of the entire population. This is rapid. This is unprecedented in the history of mental health crises in Israel. And it was never like this in many other wars. So 10% of those 60% are going to potentially move on to PTSD. It's a massive problem, massive burden for the mental health care in Israel. So the people were affected, not just in the communities around Gaza. I'm talking about the entire Israel, that people were affected by this. So the rate of PTSD, they're saying we now, 8-9 months later, has doubled. It used to be like 16%, and now it's about 30% because of the quality of it. We don't have time to really go into it. But if anyone goes through any trauma where their life is in danger, about 15 to 20% of people develop PTSD, right? So that's pretty high. But that's not true because this is, for example, rape or sexual assault, it's even much higher, maybe 60%, sometimes even show 80%. So in the Holocaust, people went through the Holocaust, also about 15 to 20% had PTSD. So it seems that there's something like this that maybe the rates could even be higher. Why is that? And also depression, anxiety, it's not just PTSD. Why is it? There's something because it was an unprecedented military failure and people felt threatened in their bedrooms. People felt threatened by this war in their kitchen, and it was a massive invasion. And people relied on the military, and it was a massive failure. So people lost confidence in the army and the military that they thought could help them. So something about the intensity and the scope of the terror and the failure of the security forces and left the public in a really, really low emotional state. And that's what we feel that we now in the mental health system have to deal with. I'm just going to give you some statistics. Iran, which is like, I'm not sure what the equivalent in England is, like a call-in for suicide and for acute distress. I'm not sure what they call it here. But they usually get 3,500 calls. Okay? They usually get 500 calls a day. 3,500 on the first day, and it's 172,000. 172,000 in the last quarter. This is about 4 months into the war. 172,000. Massive burden on the soul. People really were stressed. So the rehabilitation division of the army, they think that about 8,000 security members are going to need, by the end of this year, help on the mental health difficulties. They say of 7,000 who were injured in the current war, 7,000, 30% have severe mental health consequences. This is massive. And it wasn't like this in previous wars. 60% they say that the war is causing primarily emotional damage and not so much the physical damage. According to the Welfare Fest, 1,700 of the 3,800 people were at this Nova Festival, the musical festival, about 250 were killed. 1,700 are in treatment already. That's about half of it. It's massive. It's usually not like that in cases. Something about this. There was qualitative, not just qualitatively and quantitatively different from other terror attacks. Israel Association for Child Protection seen an increase of 30% persistence. So in other words, it extended to other areas. If people have a predisposition to some kind of mental health situation, suddenly get this trauma and you get this stress, it just brings everything up. And it could be what I mentioned, this re-traumatization. You know that people experience more trauma if they had trauma before. And the trauma the second time and the third time, we've seen it from Pigurin, from terror attacks and other situations. Once a person has already had a previous trauma, any subsequent traumas are much worse. And that's what they're seeing as well. Maccabi, which is one of the Kupatolim, and Maccabi are excellent with their data, have shown that 35% increase in use of medications for anxiety. You know, the Valiums and those kind of medications to calm. Also a massive increase. They believe there will be 30,000 new cases of PTSD amongst Israelis as a result of the current war. That's also unprecedented. It's a major burden on the mental health system, which we're starting to get ready for now. And that's what about medical professions and rescue workers? We know also that PTSD and post-trauma can also be developed by those who are going out to help the victims. And we see them as well. There's a lot of burnout and a lot of people in the mental health profession and the rescue workers who are going out to. We are now taking over I don't know what you call it, a bit of bird, because it was special, the Ministry of Health, we won a bid a tender, right, to treat Chevra Kadisha workers. Chevra Kadisha workers, you know, they're also over the years, Chevra Kadisha, you're exposed to get all the time. They are overwhelmed. What they had to deal with from October the 7th and now, in constant, you know, it's going on for, we never had a war that's lasted so long. The Chevra Kadisha workers are falling apart in Europe, and they're turning also, we're running a program now of group therapy for Chevra Kadisha workers. Okay, so just a few caveats. We have to be careful of unsubstantiated rumors. I don't know if any of you heard the rumors that 50 people that were at the party that committed suicide. This is not true. And that so many are being involuntarily hospitalized because of their trauma from it's just not true. There are a lot of things that are being there are a lot of political players out there and money's involved, and so we have to be very careful that, you know, just everything is not just accepted at face value. And the bottom line is most people at the end of the day are actually being fine if there's a support. And that's something that you have to really, you can't say, okay, Israel now will just become a country of mentally ill individuals based on the terror attacks. Not true. Because there are incredible things going on. Just in my hometown of Beit Shemesh, and this is one of the ways that it's an absolute privilege and honor to be in Israel at this time. What is going on and what we've seen from the people and how people have bonded together and are helping, everyone is doing something. Just in my city, there's, you know, just think about the biggest Costa in London, right? Closed down, and what they do, all they did for 6 months, make sandwiches for the people and for the soldiers, wherever they were. And the whole city, look at this, these are young kids and these are middle-aged ladies. They had this place and there were thousands of sandwiches from the main like, bakery, coffee shop in Betcha. The people came from, and he wouldn't take any donations, the person who owns the place. There were literally thousands and thousands of sandwiches going out from this place. Incredible, that's just one example. But everyone was doing something. You know, my wife would get up at like 4:30 in the morning and make schnitzels for 2.5 hours before she went to work. She said, well, what is it? But she wasn't alone, there were a whole lot of them. And it's incredible, absolutely honor to be with her. So I'm going back to this thing with the lion. So it's normal to respond to anxiety in a spirit. You should do that. You should. But the question is, does it affect one's function? Does it become a dysfunctional thing? And that's something that we're trying to say. Okay, so we went through a trauma. The country went through a trauma. Now, how do we deal with it? Now, resilience is something that everyone has a bit. The question is, how much is that going to help us go through this? So in life, it's not what happens to you, but how you deal with it. If you have too much resilience, so you feel nothing, then you're not going to get PTG. What's PTG? Post-traumatic growth. So we know that there's an inverse correlation. In other words, the more the resilience you have, the less the post-traumatic growth you have. So we want our children, we want the population to feel something. We're going through trauma. Not that you want it, but it's inevitable. It's part of being human. You know, that lion's running after you, have to respond. The question is, how can I translate that now? How can I use this opportunity, what we're going through, to become better individuals and more rounded? And how can I, more importantly, as an adult, as a parent, help my children or the children of that generation to come out in a healthy and not dysfunctional way? And that's what we challenge with in the mental health field and the educational field. And I think that this was actually not doing such a bad job, because the trauma that people are going through, the question is, what do you do with it? And the incredible horror stories, what is going on, every person, every soldier who falls in, every individual, every person who died in that party has a story, everyone has a family. And Israel is sensitive to each of those stories and pays attention to it. And in Yom HaZikaron this year, there was no day like that. Every year it's like a massive depression in the country. But yeah, I wouldn't call it depression so much as, okay, we're in this terrible traumatic situation, how can we come out of this, and how can we, this is the reality, how can we come out in a better way? So we know that 1 in 5 people in the war zones have mental health issues, and not just acute stress disorder and PTSD. There's more PTSD in women as well, so we have to know, we have to be more aware of that and have more programs. Holocaust survivors, we also see now, it's their second meeting of death in life. So they had it during the Holocaust, and then when they get old, or when the country is attacked in a massive way like it was, unprecedented attack, the Holocaust survivors are expressing PTSD, which some of them never had for years and years and years. And they kind of denied it or function with it, and suddenly it's coming out because it's a combination of facing death, because many of them are very old now, and the fact that they will face death on a day like this, and 1,200 people getting killed in one day, that happened 8 years ago. It shouldn't be happening now, but it is, and it just re-traumatized them. They're re-traumatized. So children have special issues, and we also have to be aware of that in the mental health profession to reach out for them. We've seen that the regressed behavior in children who are doing well, suddenly they start bedwetting, academic decline, sleeping issues, children suddenly are hyper alert, shock, the confusion, and then the teachers are sending the fear. We have to reassure, because children model their responses based on how we react. Emotional isolation, withdrawal, the teachers are seeing in the schools, and then they're saying high-risk behavior, that's also one of the responses. And religious extremes in the Haredi community, even though now the Haredi were not going to the army, they're still very aware and very, very sensitive to what's going on in the war. And we see religious extremes and people going, the kids and the teenagers who sometimes don't have perspective, with the Sikhism, so I'm going to do my part for the war. I don't need necessarily to go and fight in Gaza, but I'm going to become a religious extremist. I don't say it in those words, but the Sikhism becomes something that they hold on to try and do their bit for the country. And that's really interesting that we see that. So what are the principles of supportive treatment for people who are going through this that we need? First of all, as mental health professionals, we want to help decrease the fear and uncertainty, especially in children. We're going to maintain routine as much as possible. Whatever you can, you keep to routine. You still got to work, and you still do your own, you still dabble, you still do your stuff, you still do whatever you can, you still do your sport. You maintain routine, and it's something that is very important that we encourage. Do something. Doing something, and that's really, I think that's really what's helped the country pull through. Because everyone was doing their bit. Doesn't matter what you do. And people do all kinds of things for the soldiers and for their neighbors and for every community in Israel. Every community knows someone who knows someone. You're like maybe once removed. And my community, my small community in Beit Shemesh, 6 people I know. 6 people in families who lost someone. And everyone's one connected from, it's unbelievable. So just do something, doesn't matter what. Limit exposure to click. That's a very bad thing for our teenagers. Because, that's chesed HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it allows us to forget. But if people constantly watching those clips again and again, and the teenagers and our kids don't have perspective, it can be very, very traumatic. It becomes ingrained, and that's a big danger. And we're not ashamed to say use sometimes religion, do it for coping and for grounding. It makes a big difference. The people, we have Yiddishkeit, actually do cope better with illness and stress and tragedy, because we have structure within Yiddishkeit that helps us go through that process. It's okay to feel, but it's not okay to feel overwhelmed. So in other words, it's okay what makes us human. We don't want to be overwhelmed. Be assertive in helping, and that's what we also encourage parents to do with their children, and model coping behavior for others, especially children. So children learn from us how we deal with trauma. So we encourage children, parents, even though they are feeling overwhelmed, sometimes to share it. I'm also feeling stressed. But there's missiles are coming over and over, and we have to move when we stay in the hotels, whatever. It's not easy, but we can deal with it. We can cope with it. Children pick it up. Now there's really acknowledging that this is going through a difficult time, but not feeling overwhelmed. And to be able to sit with discomfort, and that's something that our kids don't know so much. And that's an unbelievable learning opportunity to say to the children, we're going through this crisis in this country. Let's sit with that discomfort. We can overcome this. We can move on. We can do this together. And one last thing I want to mention here. Don't hate. You don't want to hate. The other side is civilians are also suffering. And we don't want to hate. We don't hate them. We hate the terrorists. You say, we hate terror, we hate evil, but we don't hate the other side if they're not doing that. And I think that's a nuance that children and adults should also learn, and that's okay. And in the mental health field, we want to say that nuance is also important. That child could be a Jewish child, it happens to be an Arab child in Gaza, and I won't watch and say, you know what, that was suffering, that's okay. And I don't, so when people are going through trauma, we want to go through the three processes of normalizing, validating, and encouraging and saying that there's hope. You know, Viktor Frankl said, you know, when you're no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And I put that picture of the bone in because we know when a bone breaks and it heals and that part, that place where it heals is much stronger. That bone will never break. There's very, very little chance of that bone breaking in the same place. It's much stronger if it heals in that place. So we're going through this, so let's come out of this and use the opportunity which we didn't decide on, but it's there. Let's see how we can go through it. Trauma is a loss of control, and we want to help people get that back. And that's what we say in my issue and all kinds of mental health kind of situations. Clinics, we want to help people get that back. Just very, very briefly, in 1.5 minutes, I want to tell you my personal experience going through this. As everyone in the military shop, in my name, we set up a hotline for the full population because there were lots of hotlines dealing with trauma, but there weren't any specific for the full population, like Haredi and the Datsilumi. And there are nuances in dealing with trauma that we have to be sensible, culturally sensitive. And we set up a hotline when we inundated for the first month, and then we close it down. Emergency treatment evacuees, my name show, we send our doctors to the hotels where the people were evacuated. I personally spent every weekend in the beginning in Eilat. I used to travel in Eilat and treated in the hotel lobbies. It was an interesting story, and the ethical issues around it. Doing psychiatry in the hotel lobby. Massive increase in demand in our emergency room, in our clinics. Lack of doctors because some of our doctors were enlisted and began to take over. So there was a massive shortage of doctors in the beginning. Clinic for soldiers, ethical issues. You know, Lancet, bless you, in England you have this wonderful medical journal called Lancet. I submitted a paper based on my work. The ethical issues of treating psychiatric patients in our hotel lobby around it. It was accepted, it was rejected, it was accepted, and the whole story, there's a lot of story around that, which we don't have really time to get into it. But the ethical issues, and we're not, and you know, academia is allowed as well and kicking, you know, we need to, life carries on. Need for new services, we opened, for example, the English clinic now, we're seeing a great need for English speakers, and we're going to hear more about that later. And gatekeeping the truth. My role as a doctor is in treating people, not taking any role in any political activism. And that's something that's very important that we stay clear of. Our job, we have to protect boundaries and maintain boundaries, and we'll do that to the end. And I'll just end with this. Between the stimulant, I'm going back to Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who went to the Holocaust and wrote about trauma and how to deal with it. Between stimulus and response is a space, and that space is our power to choose our response, and our response lies our growth and our freedom. So it's not what happens to life that's important. It is important, but what's really critical is how we deal with it. And if we can use ourselves as a learning experience going through something that we didn't choose to go through, but we can also help ourselves, our patients, and our children, and the general population, then we've at least found some good out of a very, very difficult situation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I could listen to you again and again and again for even longer, but we have a full program tonight. The next speaker is Reverend Esther Perlman, the head of Manoa High School for Girls. Esther, I'd like you please to go on the stage. He was a naughty boy. Please go on the stage. No, because the lighting is not good down here. This is being videoed. No. Do me a personal favor, thank you.
I don't have the support of living there as well, but children there, we went there to place up, and yes, it's the place to be, there's no question about it. I also don't deal with people who've been on the front war there. You can't even imagine it, it's like unbelievable. I deal with high school girls who, yes, Hashem will be going and growing and going to Eretz Yisrael, and they have their own set of traumas, And so I'm here really to discuss that part. And first of all, I want to say a tremendous shout out to Ainea Shua. They do an incredible job everywhere. And likewise, an incredible job is done here through NOAA, which also they really help the schools, they help the girls amazingly, and they also really deserve more than just a clap because what you do there, they do here in a different kind of way, but they certainly do. And I think one of the reasons why I accepted to have this challenge of speaking here, we're really, I'm not in the same league as the others here, is because I believe in a great extent to do preventive medicine. That preventive treatment, I would say, that while the children are young still, to be able to instill in them the times that we're living, to be able to face those challenges. And how the world has changed in the past, I don't know, it's like shocking, it's unbelievable, it used to be, and I remember Rav Shach once said that there's a new generation every 2 years. Nowadays, I reckon it's every 6 months, maybe. You're dealing with a different bria. The children are a different bria than they were. Certainly, since I was young, that doesn't even tell us like the ice ages compared to now, and the changes have been huge. And it's very difficult for adults to keep up with those changes and to be able to approach the girls, and the boys, but I don't deal with boys, I deal with girls, and to be able to approach them in a different way than we were either parented or that we were taught. And that's quite a big challenge for those in our profession, as well as for those parents who are dealing with children who are going through things that one never ever went through in our time. So just before going through that a little bit, I thought it's like when you drive a car, you've got to look into the rear mirror just a little bit to know where you come from so you know where you're going. And so likewise, I just want to try to make you think, why has there been such a drastic change? And there is a drastic change with the amount of mental health issues that we're seeing. And it's quite challenging to be able to see why or where we've come from and why this has happened. So I am a daughter of a war survivor, and when we were growing up, I must say that most of the culprits that went into our lives were rebuilding, and we're healing. People were suffering terribly from what they did go through, but they didn't talk about it much. They didn't have the means to talk about it much either than there is today. And so we were growing up in that kind of generation where it was just so different, and we all had a goal. We all were being brought up with a goal that we have our priors who were chosen to live in that generation so we can rebuild what was taken away from us. And it was a very positive way of growing up because we knew that we had a purpose in life, we knew why we were here, and we knew what the Lord expected from us. After that, I think, the next generation, in a way they were distant from the war survivors, and they were distant from children of the war survivors to a certain extent, and they are growing up with the opposite in a way, where they feel we don't want our children to be deprived. We want to give them everything. Everything that our previous parents and our grandparents didn't have, we want to make up to that. And they've been giving the children a huge amount of material value, a huge amount of things that we couldn't have because they don't want to feel that their children are losing out. And so they, I think, to a certain extent, their parenting was very different as well because they were, in their minds, making up for what was lost in the material way to a great extent. So the children were growing up. The children were growing up really being able to expect things very, very instantly. Being able to be the center of everything. It's all about me. It's all about my needs. It's all about my wants. It's all about my desires. And that created a certain style in the children that, again, the parents were, although they were doing it from the best point of view, and I certainly understand that, it created a certain type of child who was growing up with different challenges than, let's say, my generation. Then came along the next generation, and the generation we're in now, and you look at them and you think, oh my goodness, they're just so different. They're so different than we were. And it's very questioning as to how do we approach that. In other words, how do we approach the fact that they haven't got the serious nefesh, first of all, that we felt we had. They haven't got the need for putting their own kaya into something because it's there for them, and it's been given to them on a simple platter to a great extent. So they haven't got that need, in a way, to have the same serious effort, to have the same that, you know what, you want something, you've got to work at it. You can't suddenly take a picture like on a camera today. You don't even have to wait for the camera to come through. You don't even have to wait. Instantly, it's there. And now with AI, oh my goodness, I don't know where that's going to go. It's like, I cannot believe that we're living in a time where there's so many changes so quickly. And how do you keep up with that? And how do you get the children to feel they've got to put their energies into things, not just like click of a button. We had a girl at school the other day, and a teacher was giving a talk, and the way that she was giving the lesson was that she says bullet points, and then she wants the girls to write it up afterwards. And one of the girls, who's not very good at English, I must say, she had perfect bullet points. So the teacher says to her, tell me, how did you manage to do that? It was really, really good that you managed to summarize so clearly what I was doing. She said, come, I'll show you. Thank goodness they're trained to be very earnestly. Look, I push this button, and what you say gets typed onto the computer. Oh my goodness. I mean, okay, maybe I'm really, really from the dark age. I didn't even know that existed, and neither did this teacher. But that is what we're living with. We're living with where they have a different degree of a child who doesn't have to work for anything, nor do they know the differences between adults and children, even visually. They just don't know their place. I'm sure a lot of you will say, the chutzpah that these kids come out with is quite incredible. But it's because they can't even see. First of all, computer-wise, they're far ahead of any of us. And now their whole life is around computers. So they feel they're way cleverer than us because actually they know a lot more about computers than, very, very little about computers comparing to them. So they feel they know it all. Second of all, we dress them the same as we. I can go to the hub of my grandchildren and I can see a little girl, 6 years old, wearing almost the same dress as I do. And their hair is exactly the same as everybody else's hair. A boy has a suit way before the mitzvah. So even visually, there's a halacha that if you teach in a kindergarten and you teach about mezuzah, you cannot bring the mezuzah down. The child has to have even though obviously they can't reach it up there, but they have to have the image that this is where I'm reaching to, this is where I'm going to. Our children even visually don't have that. They don't realize, they don't know in the same way as we all do. So why am I saying? I said I always look in the mirror, I always look back a little bit, because we need to look at where the history is coming from to be able to know how do we deal with this. So in schools and all over, I think it's a very complicated world. As you say, in Eretz Yisrael, the way that they suffer there, we can't even begin to imagine it. But the girls, the children today, all over, they see this on the clips. They see this instantly. They see what's going on. It affects them in a huge way. It's petrifying for them. And then they hear things instantly. They hear scandals. They hear all sorts of things that shouldn't be in the range of a child, of a pure neshama. It shouldn't even be there. But we're all inquisitive as by nature, and certainly children are. And you hear it even on the normal news, and nowadays the news, every time I put it on, I don't know why I listen to it, but why? Because I'm human and I'm interested. But what for? I can't change the world. So why in the world am I listening to this rubbish that's going on in the world? It's like so shocking. And every day you hear something else that you cannot believe is actually happening in this day and age. So the children are being bombarded, and you can't blame them. You can't blame them for having much less security in who they are. What do we expect of them? What does everyone else expect of them? Look at the world around them. It's so confusing. It's so confusing for them. So you can't blame them for having this insecurity. And for children to grow up strongly, they have to have security. They have to have a basis that they know they can trust. They know it's strong. So all this is really, my subject for tonight was how technology has impacted the growing up of children. And I'd like just to now bring it down, I know I'm not supposed to speak very long, so I won't, because I could go on with something about 3 days, even then I wouldn't cover it properly. That knowing all this insecurity, by them having everything at their fingertips, the whole internet, the whole technology, the whole social media, in my humble opinion, has killed a whole generation, a whole dark. So there are two separate issues. The internet is almost how books are. The internet is so dangerous. They see these things all the time, and you cannot expect them not to be interested. It's exciting. second part of What's So Dangerous. And it's worthwhile watching. It's called The Social Dilemma. It is brilliant. It is absolutely incredible. And it shows, and there are 5 people who created this years ago, and each one of them will be interviewed across the world at different times. And they were asked, so what do you do with your children? And that really got them going, and they said, I would never, ever allow internet in our house. I would never allow any of my children on that rubbish ever. And had I known, the reason why they did this, the reason why they created it was for business. And business had become very good because of it, no question about it. And we did it to increase business. Had we known this would have happened, we never, ever would have done so. Watch it. It is incredible. And it shows you literally in a person's brain that they spend billions of dollars a week to make it addicted, to make it become addicted to it. That is what they're doing. They're making you become an addict. And that's why there are new phones, they say, every 6 months. So that, number one, we all want to get the latest thing, but it's a tiny different color or a tiny little different angle when you have to move your finger and your hand. I don't understand anything about it. All I understand is it's horrendous. And if you watched it, you would never allow one's children to watch it. That's the internet part. And then where I say that that's a Harvard sorrow, because hopefully, but not everybody it makes it impossible for their children to watch it. But it's a possibility. But the social media is really what has damaged Dora to a huge extent. And it's like a computer. The software works in such a way that when you find something amazingly useful and amazingly good, and there's no question, a lot of precedent, a lot of tremendously good things have come out of being able to have WhatsApp and social media and goodness knows what. But the software works that as good as something is, equally it swings back to be as dangerous. And the question is, when one knows the dangers of what this social media has done, especially to teenagers and to relationships in homes, my question is it worth it? Is it worth the risk? If you would have a jar of sweets, gorgeous red sweets, and you have 50 sweets in that jar, 50 sweets, one, and I'll tell you now, only one is so dangerous that if you touch it, you'll really kill yourself. Would you dare even try? And I would reckon a sensible person would say, no, it's not worth the risk. So here's what, most people who use it will be fine. But the risks, the dangers this can do, first of all, between as we said, just touched on that the child growing up needs to have the security of the home. They need to have someone to hold on to and feel that's my brand and I'm proud of it. And they need to feel loved unconditionally. And they need to feel I come before anybody and anything else in my parents' lives. And that has got out the window. I go walking sometimes, they say, when I went up the road in Henton the other day, and I was in a shop, a bagel shop up in Henton. There was a family of 4, mommy and daddy and 2 children. They were sitting there having whatever it was, without a word to each other, because they were on these things. Each of them had their own, whatever it was. On an airplane, it's so pleasant to go now, it's quiet. Why? Because everybody's busy on their machine. They're not talking, they're not communicating. And when they do communicate, it's all these initials, like, well, I don't know what they are, but whatever they are. They're not even expressing, so they don't know how they're growing up, the children, not expressing language to each other. They're not talking to each other, not to the friends, but certainly not even to the families. So the family isn't this strong unit to give them that security to be able to face the world. And a lot of parents will say, well, look, this one has this, so don't stand, let's turn on something and just watch it, whatever it is. And that is, I can't even explain the dangers of that. The idea of the Frum family, the idea of Paducah Patara has gone right out the window. I think I've said this before publicly, but I was mentoring a girl going through a shidduch before, about 3 years ago, and after the 3rd date, she says to me, I'm not going out anymore with him. I said, why not? She said, you're doing very well. So she says, my friend went out last night for the 3rd time, and was all glitzy and all, and I'm not feeling like that, so it can't be right. So I said to her, so tell me, how come you're discussing that with your friend? And Miss Kirby wouldn't understand. I said, you're right, can you help me to understand you? So she says, and listen to this carefully,
who says to me, everything in my life and in our lives we always discuss with each other. Are you telling me the most important thing in life I shouldn't discuss with my friend? I said, yes, because I told you you wouldn't understand and you won't, and I don't. So, I've spoken to my brother, I've spoken to college teachers, some teachers, but they talk to each other nowadays, you would not want to know. It's unbelievable. So the Kedusha of privacy, the idea that something really of value means you don't share it, then it becomes special. They just don't get it. They literally don't, and it's not their fault. Because anything they do, you see when their mummy makes a little birthday cake, it goes out to even if it's only their parents. It's only something if I can send it out and show everybody. If I don't send it out, it's only us around the table, doesn't mean anything. That's why there's some people in the Chal Shabbos can't compare, but they feel they have to take pictures apparently on the Friday night meal, and send it to, it's not really that's a head to you, I don't know where they get that from. It's only worth it when other people see it. So they don't understand the Kedusha of privacy. They literally are growing up not understanding. Kedusha of the Torah comes from privacy. It comes from privacy. Number two, there's no mikdash Shabbat because there's no mikdash because there's no Kedusha. And you know the things that go on, as I say, look now I wear a shaker because my hair was down then when I hear these things. But it's also no ma'at because Mommy brings home 20 friends on her phone at night, Daddy brings home all his business people on his phone, and all my friends, they all each other, this friend has that. What do you mean? So it's not even small. And therefore they don't have the relationships to give them the strength, to give them that backbone, to be able to face anything, because the family unit is not there like it was. Okay, so when I was younger, also, as I said, in the Ice Age, and I went to seminary to Seoul, I know you're going to think I'm really, really, really old, and I guess I am, but for me to make a call, I was allowed once a month. I had to book it in the post office near the old city, and I had to get there in time to make this 3-minute phone call once a month. Can you imagine that today? But as a result, first of all, those 3 minutes were so precious I could hardly speak, I didn't know what to say because it was 3 minutes. But we wrote letters every day. We wrote meaningful letters with proper thought-out feelings, thought-out thoughts. We wrote that does not exist. That doesn't exist. I remember also when I first got a phone, again, I think I've said this before, when I worked in another school, and there was the teachers gave me my first mobile phone because they knew that I wouldn't get one, and they wanted me to be in touch with them. And I thought I'd be a really good mother, and I took out one child of mine, because I believe you always have to give me time with one child. Took her for a walk somewhere. My phone rang, and I was a really good girl. I looked at it but didn't pick it up. So I did 2 things. A really good mother, did not talk to anybody else, but I looked at it. Now, many, many years later, this daughter of mine, and those of you who know her know, she's very sociable, she's very popular, and nothing wrong with her, so you don't think she's a bit strange, but that's because it was so long ago. So she didn't have a phone. She had 9 her lots and lots of children, and she did not have a phone. And her kids go to the park up the road for me, and I said, you know, it's very irresponsible not to have a phone when the children in the park. It was okay, they're really ill. And Saturday they did once and them fell over. But I said, why don't you have a phone already? Why not buy it for you? Why don't you have a phone? She said, do you remember when we went out? And she told me this about that's something that happened 20 years or 15 years before. And you looked at that phone. I said, yeah, I didn't even answer it. But you looked at it. And there might have been someone there more important than me, and there was like a dagger to me. Now that sounds really nuts, but that's the sensitivity that we've lost. Because for us to answer the phone is nothing, and what we're doing to our children. My phone, my little push phone is sitting on my desk in school. If it rings when I have somebody in front of me, I would never even look at it because of that conversation. And the girls say, you can answer the phone, Mr. Brown. I said, do you really think somebody's more important than you? They look at me like I'm talking Chinese. Because it's lost the sensitivity. So I just feel that when I would like to give a drop to everybody is, and sometimes I think, and when I talk about this, sometimes I feel I'm mad. Why do I talk about it still? Because we'll never win. And I'm not asking people to change, because how can we? But I do think, and sometimes I've had there's a poster, I've given talks like this before, and one or two women might come to me a few months later and didn't know we didn't. So So I don't tell them what to use. I say, put it away upstairs. So you control, make a secret, but you're controlling the phone. You go up to it when you're ready, not it comes to you when it's ready. And they said to me, for 3 months, I'm virtually off my phone. I'm virtually off my iPhone. So I said, so how do you feel? And they all said to me 2 or 3 words. One is, I feel like a mother again. Can you imagine? I feel like a mother again. And 2 is I feel, what's the word, not released, but liberated. Thank you. I feel liberated. Can you imagine? That's why Shabbos is so beautiful, because you feel liberated. So all I'm saying is that my bracha is to realize the brain is more powerful. It's so powerful, it deceives you. The brain is so powerful. The Rambam says this somewhere, and he says the brain is so powerful, it deceives you. And it says to you, it's okay for me. Don't worry, I don't use it that day. I only use it for my grandchildren, and I use it for this, that, the other. It's so powerful. So my bracha is that we realize what we have in our hands and use it only the Torah. I'm not saying to get rid of it, because it has its very good uses. But use it for cheshbon, because the mental health that's come out of that usage is indescribable. So I just want to wish you all Hatzlacha Rabbah, and thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry for all the, it's a bit of me stood up because I told them to speak.
Thank you so much. Amazing. Yes, and Shabbos is really the gift that we have, that we can say to the phone, you don't control me, I control you, and then you press the off button. It's amazing. Okay, our next very special speaker is Nevi Lera. Who needs no introduction, head of Noah, founder of Noah. Yes, please come on the stage, otherwise I get... Thank you. Yes, please do.
My talk just this evening, we're going to keep it as brief as possible because I know time is running away, is a little less conversation, avoidant or empowering. Now, everyone knows we have a mental health crisis, and both on a national scale and on a community level. And when we started NOAH, we started with 8 girls, and I really thought that if we grow NOAH to support 30 girls a year, we'd be supporting all the girls in the community who need it. And we now support 280 girls a year. We have a waiting list of 72 girls. So I think everyone's really aware of that, but there's a big question about whether, by talking about it all the time, are we kind of feeding the beast? We're often asked about that, like as in, are we talking about it too much? And I'm not talking about on a macro level, because I think that most people do understand that actually by talking about it as a community, what we're doing is we're destigmatizing, and we're actually helping people to feel less alone and to feel that actually less shame about their challenges, and also ensuring that they're going to access support kind of earlier. But I just mean more on a kind of micro level, that when we're thinking about, and I'm going to specifically be thinking about adolescent girls, but when we're thinking about our daughters and our girls, are we sometimes talking about it too much? And are we actually, through talking about it too much, and through thinking, oh, do we need to send them to therapists, is that actually potentially causing more of a challenge? And sometimes, when do we need to just say, get on with it? So when it comes to dealing with emotional distress, all the research shows us that girls tend to discuss and boys tend to distract. And so girls use talking as a way to be able to cope with their emotions. Now that can be really, really helpful, because in a way what they're doing is they're creating a supportive network around them through speaking to parents and friends, and actually it's often a really healthy way of dealing with their stress. But sometimes what can happen is they can keep talking and talking too much, and that can cause rumination, where what that's talking about when you're actually kind of fully focused on the challenge. And that can sometimes be really unhealthy and actually can lead to anxiety and depression. So as a society, we are much more in touch with our children's challenges in a lot of different ways. It doesn't mean we pay as much attention to our children as our parents did, or around as much, but we're often much, much more in tune if they are struggling, and we're more aware, and that can be really, really helpful. It can also be unhelpful, because what sometimes happens is we cannot bear to see them in pain. Who wants to see their child struggling? So we're much more hyper-aware of what's going on with them. We're much less likely to allow them to struggle with their challenge. So what we do is we come along and try and remove all the obstacles out of their way. And it's kind of what's called snowplow parents. Who wants to just leave their child to struggle? The difficulty with this is the way that our children learn resilience, and in the way that they're able to help themselves and to grow is by learning that they can manage those challenges. That's how they build their resilience. So resilience is all about when you get knocked down and your ability to get back up again. Everybody in life goes through challenges. Everybody in life ends up in some way falling down. And so what we need our children to do is to learn how to do that so when they're adults, they're able to. But our problem is that we're removing all these obstacles from them. And sometimes we just need our children to learn how to manage those challenges. Now, it's harder than ever to be an adolescent girl at the moment, whether it's because it used to be when we were younger we just had to be pretty, now we have to be pretty and clever. All the social media that Mrs. Tillman's been talking about, all the challenges of the pressures that we have, and academically, there's so many extra, the sugar crisis that our girls are so acutely aware of, there's so many extra challenges for adolescents now. But what's really, really important, I think, for mothers today and fathers, is to be able to know what is normal adolescence. So many times we forget what normal adolescent development looks like. Now, Lisa Darmon, her book Untangled, and honestly, if there's one book that I would say to get when you're thinking about adolescence and what is normal adolescence, it's an absolutely brilliant book. My kids are often saying, why are you always reading that book? And honestly, I must have read it about 4 times and always dipping back into it. So she talks about when she was training as a psychologist, she was doing some psychological testing, and she was looking at the Rorschach ink blot test. So it's a kind of a way of measuring, it's a way of like type of psychological testing. When she was kind of going to mark them, one of the supervisors said, don't forget to look at the age of the person. Because often what will happen is you're marking an adolescent paper, you're looking at adolescent paper, and you'll think they're an adult, and you'll make the conclusion that they must be a psychotic adult. But actually, they're just a normal teenager. And it's really important to be able to know what that looks like. I love the passage from Anna Freud when she's talking about, she sums up adolescence and looking at how their normal actually seems crazy. So she says, it's normal for an adolescent to behave a considerable length of time in an inconsistent and unpredictable manner, to fight her impulses and accept them, to love the parents and hate them, to revolt against them and be dependent on them, to be deeply ashamed to acknowledge her mother before others, and unexpectedly to desire heart-to-heart talks with her, to thrive on imitation of others while searching unceasingly for her own identity, to be more idealistic, artistic, generous and unselfish than she will ever be again, but also the opposite, self-centred, egoistic and calculating. And in my very first lecture, at my first Masters at the Tavistock, I remember they brought in 2 regular teenagers. They weren't patients of the Tavistock, they were just kind of family relations of some therapists. And they were just normal teenagers, and I remember thinking, really? I've come to study and then this is what I'm hearing, like 2 normal teenagers? And I remember our professor saying, it is so important to remember what normal adolescence looks like. And that really helps us to work out when actually this is normal and when we really need to worry. So healthy teenage development can look pretty irrational. And as adults, we often think, oh, it's their hormones. And that never ever goes down well with teenagers, by the way. Never when you tell them it's their hormones. But actually, it's factually incorrect. Because now what we've learned through incredible neuroscience from the last 10, 15 years is it's really not so much about the hormones, and it's actually about the brain. So we have 2 parts of the brain. We have our upstairs brain, and we have our prefrontal cortex, where all the real thinking goes on, and that's where we're doing our kind of decision making, we're able to think about other people's positions, we're doing the problem solving. And then during that adolescent development, we used to think that the brain stopped developing at around age 12. And now what we understand is actually activity in the thinking part of the brain really, really reduces. But the back part of the brain, so sometimes we call the downstairs brain or the limbic system or the amygdala, that part of the brain, which is the emotional part of the brain, and that is hypersensitive for adolescents when they're going all the way through adolescence. So it's more hypersensitive than before they hit adolescence, and obviously much more than when they become an adult. So what happens is it's so much is going on in their downstairs brain, in their emotional brain, and it totally and they think they've got nothing to wear, it's often because they're not able to think rationally because their emotional brain has totally taken over. And that's just normal part of the brain. Now, one of the things that we often forget when we're thinking about the meltdowns that our girls are having and their really, really strong emotional responses is we're busy thinking, oh my gosh, they're acting crazy, and what's going on with them. What we forget, and what we're not really paying attention to is actually our daughters, our teenagers, they're thinking they're crazy. It's going on in their brain, and we're so busy thinking, oh my gosh, what's happening to them, that we actually forget that that's going on for them. They're busy thinking, oh my gosh, am I mad? What's happening to me? And worrying about their own sanity. So, if you've got a teenage daughter who's just developing normally, then she's busy thinking she's crazy. She's got a mind that actually is like a psychotic adult. She's got a support system in her friends that are also struggling with their own emotions and their own challenges. And so it's totally understandable that they're going to need our help as parents in order to be able to manage some of the difficulties that's happening for them. And so often what they need to do is they need to go to school and they need to manage all these emotions without absolutely falling apart, without having meltdowns in front of their teachers and their friends. And they come home and they're completely overwhelmed from keeping it together all day, and so they need to let it out. And parents are used as those people in order to be able to help them to do that. So it might seem that they're coming out and having this immense reaction, but it's just from holding it in all day. And sometimes as parents we think, well, if they've managed to hold it in all day, like really, do they really have that? They can manage it. They don't really need to have this meltdown. But there's an amazing research project which shows actually about willpower and how it doesn't last forever. And there was a great project where they pretended to the students that it was really about taste testing. And they brought students in to a room, they came in individually, and they either had, there was two plates, there's a plate of radishes and a plate of freshly baked cookies that made the room smell amazing. And half the group had to actually eat the cookies and half the radishes. And they came in and then they made them stay longer. They just said, oh, we just need to kind of give some excuse why they had to stay in the room longer. They had to stay another 15 minutes. And they said, oh, just while we're doing it, do you know what, just do some problem-solving exercises. And they gave them one of the exercises which was impossible. It was an unsolvable exercise. And what they found is the students who actually had the cookies, they on average spent double as long working out the unsolvable exercise as the ones who had the radishes, because the ones who had the radishes had given up already. Their willpower had been used to not have the cookie, and therefore they gave up on the problem. So for many of our girls, actually school in a sense is their radish. They've used all their willpower to get through it, and that they come home, and now they need to unleash. And so parents can be exceptionally helpful in actually helping them to manage their really, really difficult day. What happens sometimes though is that sometimes kids cannot hold on to the challenge that they've got. So sometimes they're just venting and they need to let it out, but sometimes they need to literally hand over their emotional problem to their parents. It's like an emotional hot potato. It's called, fish terms called externalization. And a couple of months ago, I was driving my daughter to school, and she was really, really upset about something that had happened to do with some teachers. And she's generally a really happy child, and she was really upset about it, and I was really feeling her pain. I mean, she was like almost crying about it. She was really struggling. She didn't really want to go to school. And I really, really felt like great empathy for her. And I was really starting to think in my mind, you know what, I think I need to email the teacher, what should I do? And I dropped her off, and I was a little overwhelmed by it, and I turned the car around, and literally I just was by the school gate, just driving past, and I saw her with her friends, honestly, laughing away, literally skipping into school. And if I wouldn't have seen her, I think actually I would have carried her distress all day. I would have actually been really worried because it just didn't seem like her, and she seemed so upset, and I probably would have emailed a teacher and probably would have overreacted about the thing that she told me, when actually what she had done is she just literally handed it to me, and then she couldn't let go of it. And teenagers do this, it's an unconscious process, they don't know they're doing it, but they do it quite a lot. And so what we need to remember is that's what they're doing, and it's a privilege in a sense, and a really helpful thing that we're holding it. They only do it to people they love, only to people they love. But what they're doing is they're handing over their hot potato, and I'm noting that, I need to finish very soon. And a hand of hot potato, and they're able to continue to manage their day. And so parents really create a really, really important and helpful process for our teenagers. And what's very important, and I'm just going to skip to the end right now, so the other bit. What's really important for us to remember, before we start worrying about when we need to worry, before we start kind of thinking what we have to call the therapist, is how we as parents can remember what is normal in adolescence, and how actually, yes, sometimes a little less conversation is helpful, but sometimes we can be those people who can really help to not just validate what our kids are going through, and adolescence is really tricky, but also to be able to contain it and to be able to manage their emotions, which that can be good enough to help them get through this really tricky period. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. As inspiring as usual. Thank you so much. Rabbi Dr. Samuel Landau, please come forward. And again, on the stage, if you want to skip up, you can do that without going all the way around. But we look forward to your speech. Sorry?
Can't see my slide on the screen now. Okay, good evening everyone. I wanted to speak this evening about bridging the gap. Thinking about the transition from being a sixth former or a high school student to then moving away for a year to Eretz Yisrael and entering into a new world of seminary or yeshiva. And I wanted to paint two pictures, one for Miri and another called for Aaron. And really these are a composite picture of the different experiences that might occur when a person leaves home and the different challenges that they will face. Now, spoiler alert, Miri's going to cope really well and Aaron's not going to cope so well. And then we're going to think about how we could bridge the gap for our own children to help them respond more like Miri and a little bit less like Aaron. So, Miri gets on a plane to Eretz Yisrael, she's tired, she's jet lagged, she gets off the plane and all of a sudden she is bombarded by the Middle East. It's a different culture being in Israel compared to being in England. If you want to get something done, you have to fight for yourself. People will shout at you, not because they don't like you, not because they're being rude, but just because that's the way that you communicate in Israel. And you have to learn, therefore, to manage that emotion that Miri is feeling inside her, where she wants to shrink inside as someone shouts at her for the third time. She's waiting for her luggage in the queue, and she realises actually, it's okay, maybe I can even raise my voice and shout back. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. And so Miri soon learns to have a little bit of toughness around the edges because also she notices, and she's able to zoom back from the situation and almost look like she's a camera on the wall. She's noticing that the same person that is with one breath shouting at her to get out of the way is also helping her to remove her luggage from the conveyor belt and support her to get there. And so she understands that this just is a different way of showing affection in Eretz Yisrael compared to how we do so in England. She gets to her dormitory and she's the first one there. She's actually arrived at seminary early and she's in this dormitory all alone. And she realises that this is now the beginning of the longest period she's ever spent away from home. And images rush through her mind of her mother, her father, her siblings, her friends. And she starts to cry because it's really quite difficult feeling that home is no longer right here with me. She knows that that's quite normal to feel like this. She's almost been waiting for it. She might have had some conversations with her parents, with her friends about the normal. Naomi spoke about the normal experiences of homesickness, certainly in the first few days of being away. And so the next morning she decides that she's going to share that experience with her parents and tell them how much she appreciates them because of the distance that they have from each other. Miri used to have a morning routine of going on a run and then having a really healthy breakfast. She doesn't quite know the neighbourhood that she's in. Let's say she's in High North. All these hills for the first time ever, if she is in High North. And so she's also all of a sudden got to work out what's this new routine going to be like. Can she even leave the seminary because the gates are closed at a certain time, particularly in the current situation? And so for a little while, she stops running in the mornings, which also affects both her physical and mental health. It takes a little bit of time to realise this was a really healthy coping strategy for her. And she sits down and makes a new plan. She discusses it with the seminary administrator. What's a way that she can leave in the morning that is going to be safe for her and safe for the seminary? And she puts her runs back in place. Miri's found some new friends in seminary, and none more so than her friend in the dormitory. Unfortunately, the friend in the dormitory is being over-friendly at times, to an extent that isn't quite comfortable for Miri. Sometimes the friend will kind of snuggle up at night, and Miri's not so comfortable with this. She thinks about how she could talk to her friend. Initially, she wants to try and change dorms. She just thinks she should avoid the situation entirely and maybe break the friendship. But she's learned in the past when uncomfortable things come her way, that if she respectfully addresses her friend and talks about it, maybe she'll be able to repair that boundary violation, that crossing of boundaries that is happening at night. And that's what she does. It's different being in Sen to being, say, in Hasmonean or Manora or any of the other girls' schools here, because the structure is it's a longer day. Meal times can be different. Even the time of the main meal can be different. And there's one day that is particularly boundary-less. What's the hardest day if you're in yeshiva in Sen? Shabbos. Shabbos is the hardest day, because every other day there's a plan, there's a seder, there's an order. You know when breakfast is, you know when lunch is, you know when dinner is, you know what the lessons are for the day. Shabbos, I think seminaries girls get the shorter end of the stool when it comes to Shabbos prep compared to yeshiva boys, because often there is a plan for the boys, but girls have to often fend for themselves. And the Sen will close and they will have to go and find some hospitality. And if Miri doesn't have ready family to host her, then every week she's worrying who's she going to spend Shabbos with, where she's going to be, how she's going to get there, which bus is she going to take. In order to manage this, she decides to get a few of the girls together. All of those that are worrying about this, they get together in a group, and one takes charge each week of the month. So that only 1 week a month do I have to be the person in charge of Shabbos, and everyone else will take care of a different week. Miri's parents aren't so well off. It's the first time she's ever had to budget. She makes a spreadsheet. She remembers doing spreadsheeting in school. She makes a spreadsheet and matches out her income and expenditure for the month. Miri's actually doing really well with that. I don't know if the slide's changed. Is Aaron on the screen now? Great. Aaron's on the screen now. Aaron is going to yeshiva. It's his first time away from home. He's never been at home, away from home for this length of time. He gets into the airport and it's hustle, it's bustle, it's Middle Eastern society, and he gets shouted at and he shrinks inside. He doesn't have that perspective of looking from that third person perspective like that camera on the wall. All he has is the overwhelming feeling that he's done something wrong. And Aaron stands there, frozen like the deer who has been chased by Professor Strauss's lion. And has to pause for 5 minutes because he can't actually watch. He just watches his case go round and round the conveyor belt. Not quite sure why he's been shouted at. You might remember other times he's been shouted at in the past and he wasn't able to deal with that well either. He gets to the dorm. He gets to yeshiva early and he's the only one there that night. And waves of loneliness flood through him. He doesn't have his friends, doesn't have his parents, doesn't have his siblings. He wasn't expecting this. He never thought this was going to be that difficult for him. And he cries, but he doesn't know where to communicate that to because he's not learned how to communicate his emotions in the past. And then he'll spend the rest of this month every night, even with other boys in the dorm, quietly crying himself to sleep into his pillow, not knowing quite what these emotions are about, not recognizing that it's quite normal to feel homesick. And so he gets stuck in an unhealthy place. He's got a friend in the dorm. They start to become the best of friends. He never knew this boy before. He's actually from a different country. And all of a sudden their relationship gets quite enmeshed as well and unboundaried. This other boy is also quite homesick. And so they take comfort in each other by physical closeness. He's not quite comfortable with what's happening, but he's not quite sure how to manage it. And so something persists and gets more and more unhealthy over the course of the following months. It isn't until a particular incident occurs, he just decides he's going to have to tell the one of the rebellion. He just wants to move dorms. And so he leaves the dorm, now friendless, and not processing what has occurred. It's long days in yeshiva. It's not like Asma or Menorah or all the other good schools in London. And he gets really tired out by morning Seder, afternoon Seder, night Seder, and there's an implicit pressure in yeshiva to do more and more, and even Beit Sidorim, to learn and to fill his time rather than having a nap or playing football. Speaking of football, it used to be that he played football 2 or 3 times a week. It was a really healthy outlet for him. He used to enjoy just going to the park or to the playground for break time, and that was his outlet. But in yeshiva, there's a bit of a stigma attached to Bittul Torah, and so he doesn't want to play football because he wants to be like all the other good boys and learn. And so he also puts on weight, also his mental health declines, and he's not able to go and participate in games and activities that help him feel healthy. You got the point. How do we bridge the gap between Miriam and Aaron? So I can't see the screen. I've got a few things on the screen that I wanted to read out. So just a few points from here, and I'm going to jump down and look at my notes on the screen. It may be too late to tell our kids what to do. They're 18 after all, 19, 20. Ultimately, we are a little bit irrelevant as guides and directors for many of our kids at this point in time. They're not going to listen to what we tell them to do and instruct them to do. Because ideally, we have created for them a healthy attachment from an early age, where they knew that if they explore away from the family home, that mum and dad are going to be there when they come back to process the event, to help them feel safe and understand what occurred. They ideally would have had healthy habits of emotional, physical and spiritual coping before they left home, in order that when they go away from home, those healthy habits can persist. But at least, as parents, when our kids are adulting, we can proactively talk to them and think about what they're going through. So just a few both practical and relational tips. I don't know about you, but I can imagine when I went to Eric's role, I don't think my parents had a single person to talk to in the yeshiva about what was going on with their son. My parents are like early orders, by the way, so slightly awkward. But they wouldn't have anyone to talk to. And I think it's really important that as parents, you have those points of contact in the yeshiva or SEM that you know you can pick up the phone to. If you're worried about your child, you don't know how to communicate that to your child, because all they say is, Mom, Dad, don't worry, but you are worried. Have a person that you can talk to and pick up the phone and speak to, that you can trust. If your kids don't have structure on Shabbos, then see if you can help them with that. All you have to do is phone up a few people, a few of your own contacts, old friends, relatives, distant third cousins, twice removed, somewhere in your back of a kibbutz somewhere, but they might offer an invite to your kid that will be really, really helpful for them. I always like to be proactive rather than reactive. I'd rather that we plan, if we know our kid's going to struggle, we plan to visit them every 2 months, and they know that every 2 months, Mommy or Daddy's going to fly in and see me, or I'm going to fly back for a couple of days, just for a weekend, and see them if costs can be managed, rather than them feeling like they failed because all of a sudden now Mum and Dad is making that special trip to come and see me because clearly I'm weak, I'm too weak to be supported from afar. Better to be proactive and just say, if you know that they might have an issue with that, I've planned these visits already. I'm looking forward to seeing you at Suttas, I'm looking forward to seeing you at Hanukkah, I'm looking forward to you coming back just after Purim. And already that's a few landmarks on the horizon for them to know that they're going to feel connected to you. In psychological therapy, we always have, with many of our clients, we have a safety plan. I think it's great if we could proactively speak to our kids about having a safety plan. Lizzie, look at me like I'm running out of my time. Sorry. Cool. So here's a safety plan that you could have: a physical safety plan, a psychological one, and a spiritual one. A physical safety plan in the current climate would be agreed upon times to be home, times to be back in a place of safety. Places where you're comfortable for your children to go and where it's not comfortable to go. Have that conversation in advance. We were just out to stroll in February time, and my friend and I went to the Old City. We went for a walk and went to the Old City. He said to me, shall we go through the Arab Shuk? I was like, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? I don't go through the Arab Shuk on a good day, let alone 3 months, 4 months, 5 months after October the 7th. So I looked at him like, oh, I said, you've got your gun on you, haven't you? Okay, so the safety plan was updated based upon the fact that my friend was able to protect us. But I'm just making the point that this should be something that we can talk about with our kids. How do we recognise what's safe, what is unsafe? What about tramping? Who do we take tramps from? Do we take tramps at all? How do we travel around the country? What time do we travel around the country? A psychological safety plan. You probably know your kids' edges and wobbles more than me. What symptoms, what signs might they elicit that you could already have a pre-agreed upon plan? If this is happening, then here's what we're going to do. And a spiritual safety plan as well. I alluded to the unbounded nature of being away from home for the first time, of exploring our identities in all sorts of ways. Have a spiritual safety plan to help and make a course correction, and to have that open, honest communication with our kids. One of the things that I find clinically is that parents are worried to talk to their kids about some of the most important aspects of identity. If they don't talk about it with you, they'll be talking about it to their friends in the playground, or they'll be learning about it from places which we don't want them to learn about. We don't want them to learn about it, which without the conditions that Mrs. Helen spoke about so beautifully. Have a spiritual safety plan. If things are going awry, that there's a way to make that course correction together with the rebellion, together with parents. A few more points about the relational things that might help. Help them pay attention about the achievements that they make. Help them shep nafas in themselves. Wow, your first week in SEM, your first week in Yeshiva. Think about all the hours of Torah you've learned. You've never learned as many hours of Torah in 1 week in your whole life. Wow, think about all the new friends that you're making. Remember how it used to be so hard for you to socialise? Help them look at themselves, that camera perspective on the wall, so that they can feel that they're achieving something in this year. Have a fixed time to speak. We're very good at reacting. We're very good at WhatsApping now. There's always like this time to speak. You're really good to have a fixed time to have a FaceTime, a Zoom, where we know we're going to have an hour just to talk with our parents. Of course, we're going to have reactive times throughout the week. I used to speak with Thursday evenings was my time to speak to my parents. I would go to have a swim and then walking back from the pool, I would have a half-hour conversation with my parents. That was what I did in Yeshiva. But actually, they know that that is their time, our time in the week, to really feel our relationship. If you want to do it through learning, if you want to do it through an activity, that can be a really beautiful way to have a Gemara or a book or a shtaken in front of you, and then they can share what they've learned in SEM, but use that as an opportunity to schmooze. And I'm just going to finish with the last point, which is that I specifically chose the word names of Aaron and Miriam, because neither of them were Moshe. And many of us might have an imagination that our child is going to be Moshe Rabbeinu, or in the female form. And maybe they let us down somewhat because they're only Aaron Cohen. They're only Miriam Hanaviyah. They're not quite Moshe Rabbeinu. We don't focus on how incredible they are and give them that unconditional love. We focus on what they're not doing quite so well right now and bring judgment to that relationship. When they're going through what they're going through and all these new visitors, let's recognize the beautiful things that they have, because that helps them feel good about themselves, helps us sustain a relationship come what may, no matter how many unwise decisions we might make. And it's that relationship that will help them forever navigate all the ups and downs of life, because they always know they can come back to you who loves them as Aaron, you who loves them as Miriam. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we're going to be ending this evening with Dr. Bella Shamsa. The trouble is, we're not down here. We're not visiting. Can we turn the screen? Can we turn the screen around? What I've shown you, so we can see the screen from up there. Just go down. Just go down. You've got to look and see and check and see. Okay. a compulsory lesson for every parent before they send their kids to our training.
So first, I want everybody to stand up for a second. You've been sitting for way too long. Nobody's going to be up to your eyes. So everybody stand up. Open your legs a little bit. Take some deep breaths. It's been an incredibly informative evening, but even when we're informed, we still get a little tired. So, okay, now you can sit down. So, I want to share my thanks to everybody who came out this evening. I would say that it's so nice that you came out in the rain, but I think that's pretty par for the course here. So, really good. Thank you very much. I know it's been a long evening, but I hope you've all been enjoying listening. I certainly have learned a tremendous amount, and I really want to thank all the other esteemed speakers for sharing. And I have to say that I feel like what I'm going to say is extraneous and probably unnecessary, but I appreciate your attention for the next few minutes. What we've heard so far is about, well, let's leave the October 7th presentation, and I think we all appreciate how significant October 7th was for Israel and for the Jewish people, and for all of your children who will be coming to Israel and who are in Israel this year. October 7th was seriously a life-changing event for everybody, but certainly for the seminary and yeshiva kids. I think it exposed them to what it really means to be part of Am Yisrael in a way that they never could have otherwise. So I think Professor Strauss starting the evening with October 7th was incredibly important and on point. And I also want to thank our other two speakers for reminding us of what it means to be normal, right? And that as teenagers, we experience things. Social media is unfortunately, for better or for worse, part of our children's lives. And I'm going to throw out another book that I'm in the middle of reading right now, so I don't know if it sustains itself the way it has up until now, but Professor Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist, a moral psychologist in the United States, just published a book called The Anxious Generation. And he must be on the same wavelength, because he basically writes about the real negative impact of social media on our young people. And when you read it, you just keep thinking, wow, I should never let my child anywhere near a phone. So I highly recommend that book. It's excellent, it's very well written. And I also think it's important, though, to realize that this is part of our children's existence, and to remember what it means to be normal. And in adolescence, it's hard. Just if you think back to our adolescence and how difficult it was to be a teenager when we were growing up, and now it's so much more difficult because their lives are literally under a microscope. Everything they do is photographed and discussed and teased to the greatest degree. So even for a young woman or a young man who has no diagnosable mental health issue, they are under stress because their lives are constantly being judged, and that is very, very difficult. And of course, we're always on some level being judged, and it's too bad we don't appreciate the fact that on some level Hashem is watching us all the time, but for a young person, their friends watching them is more important than Hashem, and we have to remember that when we're thinking about young people. And certainly when young people leave home and they're in an environment that's different, it can be very distressing. So I want to thank everybody for sharing those words, and I really think that we've all gained tremendously. But to bring it to my specific topic, it's on the new English-speaking clinic that we're going to be opening up in Ma'aneh HaYeshua, and why I think it's important. I don't think I need to convince any of you guys that we have serious mental health issues right now in the world, but since I'm from America, we like to make it seem like, the United Kingdom has much more problems than we do. So I'm going to just tell you the statistics of mental health in England. It's not so good. It's not so good anywhere, but it's certainly not so good here. And as you can see by the numbers, mental health has been worsening year after year. And they've been doing surveys, certainly in England, every 10 years. And this data is, some of it's from 2014, some of it's more recent. But essentially, our young people are in crisis. Right? 1 in 6 people, young people, have mental health problems. This is up from 1 in 9 in 2017. 1/3 of young adults, 1/3. That's an astonishing number. right, report some type of symptom of depression and anxiety. 39% of university students describe declines in their mental health. I mean, you see, it's astonishing what is happening to our young people. And social media certainly is playing a role, but I'm sure that there are other causes that we haven't fully understood, but it's not a good situation. In terms of treatment needs, on the flip side, they're getting more treatment, but that does also mean that we have a responsibility to make sure that we are able to sustain that treatment. Prescriptions have skyrocketed for antidepressants and anxiolytic medications. There's a 35.2% increase in SSRIs alone. SSRIs are medications that we use to treat depression and anxiety. They're the first-line treatment at this point. That's a huge increase. Tremendous. This is all over the last few years. And this means that when your young people are coming to Israel, they're coming with these problems on these medications. And for better or for worse, they don't magically get better when they come to Israel. I know there's this fantasy that you get off the plane at Ben Gurion and all your problems go away because now you've landed in Eretz HaKodesh, Halabad. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. And these young people need help. And they need help in Israel just like they need help in England. Unfortunately, the people who already live in Israel also are struggling. And certainly, as Professor Strauss so beautifully represented when he spoke, the mental health needs in Israel are only getting worse. Unfortunately, the number of providers has not increased at the same rate as the number of people who need us. And so your children, so I'm not going to read off all the numbers, you can read them for yourselves. Your children are coming to Israel, bringing with them the issues that they had in England, on the medications that they were taking in England, to a country that's already stressed and already understands in terms of mental health picture. And then add to it that your children need services in English. Now, they can't necessarily, perhaps they could see a psychiatrist who kind of speaks Hebrewish, which is sort of this weird mix of Hebrew and English that a lot of Israelis speak. But they certainly can't see a therapist who only really speaks Hebrew. It's hard enough for a young person to connect with a therapist. It's hard enough to get an adolescent to go to seek treatment. Now you're going to ask them to see somebody who doesn't even speak their same language or doesn't understand their cultural needs. And don't forget, when it comes to adolescents, connecting with them is critical to maintaining engagement. And even though when they come to Sen and Yeshiva, they're 18 and 19, their chronological age is older than a lot of their mature age. A lot of them still, from a emotional perspective, are functioning more in the 14, 15, maybe 16-year-olds. They really need therapists who can connect with them culturally and from a language perspective. Well, so this is a problem because there are a lot of Anglo students in Israel. And there are way many more students in Israel who speak English and who don't speak any Hebrew than we have providers. So this is just some of the statistics for how many young people are coming to Israel every year. And I was actually amazed at the number of programs that have developed. And I remember when I was in Israel, just a very long time ago, I think there were like 5 or 6 seminary programs, and then there were a handful of yeshivas. There are 36 yeshivas, and these are only the ones that are associated with MASA. MASA is an organization that helps coordinate young people coming from Anglo-speaking countries to Israel. So I may not even be touching on all the yeshivas, although when I read through the list, it seemed pretty comprehensive. 41 seminaries, 38 non-yeshiva or seminary Gabri programs, and there are tons of non-seminary yeshiva Gabri programs. And these are children who also come who need services. The programs range in terms of numbers between about 10 to 100 participants, depending on the program. You're talking about at minimum, even if each program only had 10 students, and we know that that's not the case. I mean, my son goes to Hakotel, he went to Hakotel, and he had 50 men in his Shana Aleph class, right? So in the new Shana Bet, there were 25, so it's 75. Plus he's Shana Gimel, you can do the math. Right? But even if we say that each program only had 10, you're talking about 1,150 students coming from Anglo countries. It could go up as high as 11,000 students. It's somewhere in the middle. I was not able to get an exact number, but it's probably between 7,000 to 9,000 students coming every year from Anglo-speaking countries to Israel. And the percentage mental health issues that are coming to Israel who need support and ongoing care. And this is on top of the other Anglos who are in Israel who need support. Regular Anglo-Olim need mental health services, and many of them need them in English again. When you're getting mental health care, you want it in your mother tongue. It is much easier to convey, to talk about emotional issues in the language that you were born in. Plus, a lot of Olim, I'm embarrassed to say, and I'm one of them, really don't speak Hebrew very well, even after living there for a bit of time. And then you have the lone soldiers. So I don't know if you all are familiar with the Lone Soldier program, but the IDF has young men and women from Anglo-speaking countries and many other countries around the world who come and serve in the army. And the ones who are from Anglo-speaking countries also need Anglo-speaking services. And these are just one on top of another of individuals who come to Israel and need services for their mental health issues in English. Something that really has not existed up until now. Just to give you a sense of what does exist, which is minimal, is this slide. And I verified these timelines from providers in the public health system. It can take 2 to 3 months to see an English-speaking psychiatrist. Now, if you are in the middle of a crisis, and the crisis doesn't mean that you need to be hospitalized. It means I've been very depressed, and I really need to start on medication. Or I have ADHD, and I can't get my ADHD medication because I can only get 1 month at a time if I come from the state of New Jersey. I don't know what the rules are in London, but getting stimulants for more than a month, up to 3 months at a time is very difficult. You can wait 3 months. That's not acceptable. How do you wait 3 months to see a psychiatrist? And that's to see a psychiatrist. It's even longer to see a therapist. 6 months time it can take to see a therapist who speaks English in the public system. Well, if you're waiting 6 months, I mean, you're done, right? You can wait 6 months to see a therapist. You might as well go back home. This is a big problem. Now, there is the private system. So that's where many of these young people end up getting serviced, in the private system. The private system is very expensive. You can see the prices. So I don't know what the shekel, so college, I don't know what the shekel to pound, you guys are pounds, right? The shekel to pound conversion is. But in dollars, this is about, you're talking about $150 for a social worker, about $200 for a psychologist, and a psychiatrist, you're talking about $400 to $600. That's expensive. That's expensive on top of the cost of the program that your child is in, the spending money. Not everybody can afford treatment in the private system. So you have now an increasing group of people who have needs that are not being met. And this is a little mini crisis in and of itself, because we want our young people to be able to come to Israel. It is so important for them to have the opportunity to learn in Eretz Israel. I believe that in my heart of hearts, it is the most critical thing we can give to our kids is to get them connected to Eretz Israel, and having them come for a year to learn, to develop independence in their supportive environment. It's a gift that has no price to it. So it's incumbent upon us to create a system that can help support them so that every child, regardless of their psychiatric and psychological baggage, so to speak, can come to Israel and enjoy themselves and gain and connect and decide to stay, God willing. Right? That's the ultimate goal. Sorry, that's a little secret. We want everybody to come to Israel and stay. But at the very least, we need them to come for a year. So how do we do that? So I had the privilege of working with Professor Strauss when I first made Aliyah. When you make Aliyah as a psychiatrist or any medical field, you have to do kind of a pseudo-residency for a few months where they watch you to make sure that you know what you're doing. And Professor Strauss allowed me to do that at my Maker Yeshua. And in one of our conversations, my Hebrew was not great, so they didn't think that I could necessarily stay on as a provider dealing with only English-speaking patients. We thought it would be great if we could set up a program for English speakers, because that I can do. I speak English pretty well. And it was a good German idea, and thanks to Professor Strauss and Klein Becker, they decided to make it a reality. And so, God willing, starting in September of 2024, we're going to open, I think, the first formal mental health clinic that provides services in English in Israel. And of course, who did students coming from Anglo-speaking countries for their gap year, a population that really falls through the cracks, that are either waiting an unacceptable amount of time to get help through the public system, if they can even access the public system, if they have insurance to allow them to do that, or paying exorbitantly high fees in the private system, neither one of which is an acceptable solution for managing their mental health issues. So the clinic will be location a little bit to be determined, but they will definitely have a branch in Jerusalem, hopefully, as well as in Bnei Brak itself. We realize that Jerusalem is much more of a center for most of the yeshivas and SEMs. Obviously, there are some students who learn in the Bnei Brak area or more in the center, in the Merkaz of the country, but the fact is most young people end up in Jerusalem, so we will definitely have services there. And the key is that this is not just in English. It's in English, it's Orthodox friendly, so the students can come and their issues will be understood from the get-go because the providers are going to be individuals who are culturally sensitive, who not only understand their background coming from England or the United States or Australia or South Africa, but who understand the nuances of seminary life, yeshiva life, and it is very different. At the minimum, all of a sudden they're living in a dormitory with all these other young people, and they have to learn what it means to create boundaries. That's, in and of itself, is an incredibly challenging thing, let alone doing it, on little sleep and without your parents' support. And so this way, when they come to our clinic, they will be in a place where they feel at home. That's the goal, to give them a space where they can get their mental health treatment in an environment that feels like home, with providers who get them, who understand them, who can speak in the same language, who may be much older than they are. So of course, and my children constantly tell me how I don't understand anything about their generation, but at the very least, I can make them pretend to understand what they're saying because at least I a little bit understand some of the abbreviations that they speak in. And hopefully the system will work well. The referral process is either going to be through self-referral, so the students will be advertising this clinic through the various seminary and yeshiva organizations. Obviously, at this point, thank God, most of the yeshivas and seminaries have individuals who are serve as in a social work type role, or the Raman, the Shir Rebbe, and there are people at this point in the SEMs and yeshivas who are aware of the importance of making sure that the young people's mental health needs are being addressed. My assumption is that they will serve as a referral source for us. In addition, we're working with some of the insurance companies that provide insurance to the students, EmaCare. Some of you are familiar with that. We're creating collaborations with them, with MASA, to make sure that the organizations are aware of us so that they can also help refer young people to us. But the community is the most important referral source. You all are here. If you each have 5 of your friends who are sending their children to Israel next year, and they tell 5 of their friends, that's how this clinic will the word will get out, and you guys will be our referral sources. You will help make sure the students know that they have a place to go. And I think that's really, really important because it's hard for anybody to leave home. It's hard for anybody to go to a foreign country, and my daughter was telling me she's going to be going to Madrashat Harova next year, and she was telling me about a friend of hers who has no family, no relatives at all in Israel. She said, Mommy, she's really going to live in a house with us. I said, of course, it's fine. She said, she has no family. It's amazing. How do you not meet my daughter's sister? I can't believe it. She doesn't have anybody in Israel. But that's the rule, actually, more. That's not the exception. We think it's the exception because we live in Israel, so it's crazy for us to think that somebody doesn't have any family in Israel, but most students come to Israel and they don't have family. Or maybe they have They have like their friend's grandmother's third cousin who they're going to see. That's not family. That's not somebody that serves as a support for them. That's somebody that they couldn't go to for a Shabbos.
we've run out of time. We're not going to have time for the questions and answer sessions, unfortunately. But you all have our contact details. Any questions you might have, please forward to us. We already have some questions that we were given. We do have some of the responses which we will forward to anybody who is interested. I want to end off with two very small but I think very important points. I remember sitting at the Shabbos table some years back, and our niece, whose parents were in the United States, in City A, was on a gap year program, and we were their family. She was staying with us as well. And my older brother came for Shabbos as well, and he asked her, "Where do you live?" And she burst out crying. Why? Because while she was in her gap year in Israel, her parents had moved. So she actually had no home to go to because they moved to a different country to take up a position there. It hit me that a gap year student needs to have a home somewhere. They need that comfort zone. So we can provide something temporarily, but there's always that knowledge in the background, I have a home to go back to. So the vulnerability of a gap year student is there, and we just have to recognize it as much as we can. And the second point I want to make is as follows. We call this cultural sensitivity. The fact that Ma'ayaneh Yeshua has done amazing work in providing the answer to the question of where do I send my child that needs some sort of mental health therapy or protection or whatever. Because before Ma'ayaneh Yeshua began its program, there was a very, very big dilemma, because to send a boy to a non-religious, non-Jewish environment where there are girls sharing the public space, and these girls have serious mental health issues, don't understand they need to be fully dressed the whole day. The boys who never saw their sister or mother getting dressed or undressed, the trauma they will be going through is worse than whatever they're being sent there for. So the parents would not send. I would not send my child, if it was necessary, to that sort of environment. Or take a young girl, teenage girl, to an eating disorders environment where all the other girls are not religious, on their smartphones, dressing like they dress. How long can that girl last in a frum situation? She'll come home looking like the other girls. She'll be embarrassed to be home with her parents. The parents are even more embarrassed to have this child coming home like that. And it's a recipe for disaster. So again, the girl would not be sent for treatment. Now, if you break a leg and you don't treat it, you can lose a leg. If you don't treat anything in mental or physical health, it gets worse. What we have done in Ma'ayaneh Yeshua is we've solved that problem. We have opened the doors so that there's no longer an excuse not to send. But the demand is not because, it hasn't grown because there's more cases. It's because there is no longer an excuse not to send. So it's our responsibility, having started something like this, to make sure that we partner with Noah Goals, with the Clubhouse, with other organizations doing amazing work, but providing the continuity of help and of assistance where needed. And it's all of our responsibility as a community to make sure that this cannot be, the demand is out there, we have to provide as much assistance and sharing information and even creating more development and more services where possible. We're hoping we'll build a whole new floor for eating disorders. We have some of the funding already. I'm not making the appeal, I'm just saying that it's there and now we have to deal with it. And I have learned so much from this evening. I won't go through the speakers again. Thank you all very much. Thank you for coming, and there'll be a video presentation recording of it, which will be accessible later on. I want to thank everybody once again, and wish you a healthy summer, both of course, Nefesh and of course, Agor.